Mass UFO sightings, where large groups of individuals supposedly witness the same unexplainable event, are an uncommon, though not unheard of, occurrence. In such cases, the abundance of eyewitness testimonials often lends credence to the claims made. Whether this credence is deserved is not immediately clear, however, and a close examination of even the most seemingly unassailable claims is worthwhile. The Westall School and Ariel School sightings represent two extremes of this particular genre. Separated by 10,000 miles and almost 30 years, somewhat similar events took place, and yet the character of each is utterly different. April 6, 1966 was a beautiful autumn morning in the outskirts of the Australian city of Melbourne, in an area known as Clayton South. 2 days before Good Friday, the upcoming Easter holiday break was on the forefront of everyone's mind at the neighboring schools of Westall High and Westall State, a primary school. At the high school, two groups of students ranging in age from 11 to 16 years were undertaking a physical education class on the large sports oval, one of the groups playing cricket, the other football. At about 10:15, an unidentified student suddenly stopped what he was doing and called everyone's attention to an object slowly moving through the sky at about 500 to 600 meters distance. Reports made by witnesses, including students Maryland Eastwood and Colin Kelly, described the object as more or less disc-shaped and silvery or silvery green in color, generating, as student Joy Tyga described in a contemporary report, a whirring noise. After a time, a minor panic ensued as the perceived enormity of the occasion overtook the onlookers. Many of the students stared in wonderment, while others bolted from the field in hopes of finding shelter inside one of the campus buildings. Unable to continue with instruction, physical education teachers who were on duty at the time urged the remaining students to follow in kind and leave the field for their own safety. Meanwhile, science teacher Andrew Greenwood nearly jumped out of his shoes when an unnamed female student burst into his class, shouting something to the effect of, "There's flying saucers outside!" Though the girl quickly left, the class's attention was now understandably riveted to the windows, much to the teacher's consternation, as his lessons were not yet complete and the recess bell was not due to ring for another 5 to 10 minutes. In a later interview with University of Arizona physicist James McDonald, Greenwood noted that he didn't take the girl's exclamation seriously, as he knew her to be somewhat excitable. His immediate impression was that it was in fact a prank designed to test his commitment to class discipline. In another room, Graham Simons, a chemistry student in a class taught by Barbara Robbins, recalled gazing out over the grounds behind the school while working on an experiment, only to see something in the sky he didn't recognize. Still on the oval, students Colin Kelly and Brendan Dixon watched as the strange object descended to about 9 to 10 meters off the ground, hovered momentarily, then rose straight up and continued over a series of electrical lines and behind a copse of pine trees located in a nearby nature preserve known as the Grange. A few moments after the initial sighting, several classes, along with Mr. Greenwood, Ms. Robbins, and English teacher Claude Miller, hurried outdoors, the chemistry teacher having the presence of mind to grab a camera and start taking several exposures, though it's unclear whether these were of the mounting chaos on the school grounds or of the UFO in question. Graham Simons later likened the scene to a herd of zebra escaping a lion, and fellow student Jeff Holland recounted what he described as a surging mob. Clearly, word of the unusual sight had gotten around. On a small truck farm located between the high school and the Grange, Westall alumnus Paul Smith was pulling carrots with his boss in preparation for market. Both men heard the commotion and subsequently became aware of the strange object in the sky behind them. Quote, "We stood looking at it for several minutes. A few moments later, the children came over from the high school and they noticed us. It took a while to make up their minds if they would come onto our private property. They ran straight over across the market garden." Unquote. Indeed, though hesitant, as school was still in session and neither the truck farm nor the Grange were public land, many of the students, including Graham Simons, Terry Peck, Jacqueline Argent, and a girl named Tanya, jumped over the low fence running along the southern border of the Westall High campus, hoping to see the object close up, as it was assumed to have landed while out of view behind the trees. It was later claimed by nebulous sources that Tanya, along with possibly another student, had fainted upon arrival at the landing site. Later, after being revived and returning to campus, it was claimed by some that Tanya suffered screaming convulsions so severe she was quickly put into an ambulance and whisked off, never to return. A notably curious account is given by Victor Zakruzny, who had been a Form 2 student at Westall High, equivalent to an 8th grader in the American school system. Zakruzny was adamant 2 objects had landed in the Grange, and that he and about a dozen students, in a different group from those who had jumped the low fence, had in fact closely approached both of them. Zakruzny had gotten close enough to one of the objects to actually contemplate placing a hand onto its surface, though he declined, considering the object seemed to be radiating a great deal of heat. Whether the young Zakruzny saw something or not, student Terry Peck arrived with her companions to find a large circular patch of grass, crushed and flattened as if by a great rotating weight. Peck described looking up almost at once to see a saucer-shaped object, quote, turn side on and just disappear into thin air, unquote. While the students were in the Grange, a young man who was later identified as Sean Matthews, and whose family had leased the land for the adjustment of horses, approached the group to inform them they were trespassing. Though the students told Matthews of a flying saucer and indicated the anomalous spot on the ground, he seemed completely disinterested and only grew more belligerent, demanding they vacate at once. Back on the school campus, Mr. Greenwood and student Jeff Holland watched several light aircraft, possibly Cessnas, come into view and cluster around the UFO. Greenwood opined the aircraft seemed to be playing a game of cat and mouse with a mysterious object. Holland elaborated further in an interview with the Clayton Calendar. Quote, as the aircraft approached, the thing tilted on about a 45-degree angle and started to move into the distance, gradually gaining height. The planes increased their speed and began to follow it, but the object streaked away, leaving the planes far, far behind. The planes turned back, and we all stood hoping it would return, but it didn't, so we all went into school 15 minutes late, unquote. Consider accurate. One would expect for the student fence jumpers to have also encountered a sizable group already in the Grange, hopelessly confusing any possible timeline. This isn't to say Mr. Zakruzny is being untruthful, but his recollections may be faulty or inadvertently conflated with other unrelated memories. The fact that one crucial detail of his account is probably inaccurate, that he was at the landing site before and apart from some of his classmates, calls into serious doubt the other details offered by him, including descriptions and sketches of the object's size and appearance. But other students who entered the Grange did at least note a flattened circular patch of grass before being ejected from the property by Sean Matthews. Contrary to the student's claims of his blasé attitude, Matthews indicated in a later interview with Melbourne newspaper The Sunday Age he had indeed seen a strange object enter and exit the trees. Quote, I saw the thing come across the horizon and drop down behind the trees and saw it leave again, unquote. Estimating it to be about the size of 2 family cars, Matthews went further to say, quote, it was silvery, but it had a sort of purple hue to it, very bright, but not bright enough that you couldn't look at it, unquote. Why Matthews did not call attention to these facts and corroborate the student's admittedly outlandish story is somewhat puzzling, and Matthews himself offers no explanation. It is possible, though, that once the object left the Grange, Matthews prioritized the trespassers as the most immediate problem, and thus refrained from fueling their curiosity and encouraging further encroachment onto his family's property. If students such as Terry Peck were correct, and there was some sort of circle formed in the tall grass, it should be noted that it was not permanent and was not again mentioned by anyone apart from one-off recollections, decades after the story had become public knowledge. However, this doesn't mean the circle didn't exist. It is quite likely a circle or roughly circular patch of crushed grass could have been at the site, but since no credible account positively connects a landed craft with such, its association should be seen as spurious at best. As mentioned, Mr. Greenwood and Mr. Miller also jumped the southern fence to investigate. Greenwood had heard some of the children had found what he colloquially termed a UFO nest and wanted to see for himself. Quote, we tried to see what we could find. There were reports from several groups of children later on that they'd seen one of those typical nests. It would have been the perfect area to see one in, lots of long grass. But I didn't see one myself, though I looked around for quite a while. Unquote. Were the 2 men simply in a less suggestive frame of mind, or were they simply looking in the wrong spot? And what of the mysterious and eerie fate of the witness known as Tanya? Because of the ephemeral nature of her part in the overall narrative and the difficulty in locating her since the events in 1966, indeed Greenwood himself never even mentions her in any accounting. It has been suggested by some investigators that her very existence is in doubt, But such a conclusion would necessitate either gross deception or delusion by classmates such as Jacqueline Argent, who are absolutely adamant about her participation. It could be that Tanya was a student as well as a UFO witness, and that her later departure from the school grounds may have been an unconnected occurrence. This theory is supported by a statement made by former student Lance Brown. Quote, "In that 2-month period I'd been at school, Tanya had been quite notorious to say the least, but when she vanished I didn't relate it to the UFO, more her wild ways." Unquote. No one apart from Victor Zakruzny ever mentioned seeing a landed craft, grounded balloon, or spent parachute. Others, such as Terry Peck, claimed to have seen a circle in the grass and a strange object in the sky directly above, a strong implication that the two were related. If the UFO was in fact a downed highball balloon or parachute from an associated flight, one would expect the students would find it, as by all accounts they had arrived on the scene a considerable amount of time before any ground crew could secure the area. It is conceivable a partially deflated balloon might be lifted back up off the ground by a small gust of wind, but it is very unlikely it would have had enough buoyancy to quickly rise above the treetops and make the kind of rapid departure as that reported by Greenwood and students Jeff Holland and Brendan Dixon. That a total of 4 to 6 aircraft were seen in the area is an interesting and perhaps telling detail. A chase plane was a vital component of highball missions, without which recovery of sensitive hardware and telemetry would have been very difficult. Granted, there would have been no need for as many aircraft as was reported, but considering the normally high volume of air traffic in the region, having other unassociated planes in the sky at the time would not be much of a stretch. But if the UFO was in fact a parachute from a highball balloon, why wasn't any chase plane seen when the UFO first appeared? No aircraft were observed by witnesses until after the recess bell rang, a minimum of 5 to 10 minutes. Some reported the UFO had emitted a noise that could reasonably be described as a conventional aircraft engine, but the close proximity of Morabin Airport to the school would seem to suggest such sounds were a common occurrence. Why would so many not recognize the sound if that was indeed what it was? Considering the difficulty Greenwood had in making visual contact with the unknown object due to the lack of atmospheric contrast, it is very possible a single aircraft was in the air and went unnoticed for some time. Any noise created by said aircraft could have been erroneously associated with the UFO, as it was so commonplace that students and teachers normally tuned it out. A group of aircraft would seemingly give credence to the theory of a target drogue and could possibly explain some of the object's movements if the lead aircraft was circling the area, waiting for the other aircraft to arrive on scene. Most light aircraft of the type later described by Holland, Greenwood, and others usually fly in excess of 100 knots, or about 200 kilometers per hour. And while a towed drogue can certainly exhibit darting, evasive behavior, that is the whole point of its use, some of the maneuvers described, particularly by Mr. Greenwood, are quite curious. For example, in his interview with James McDonald, Greenwood indicated the object hovered several times, accelerated rapidly, sometimes crossing as much as 30 degrees to one side or the other, moved toward and away from the gathered crowd, yet always maintaining a distance of at least 500 meters, and bobbed up and down. Though the object usually made rapid movements, there were times it seemed to drift. Of course, in Greenwood's case, these are details about something seen at least a year earlier. To have such memories be totally free of distortion would be more puzzling than the UFO itself. Stories of military cover-ups are by nature conspiratorial and often lead to conclusions of questionable veracity. Many times these stories are comprised of second or third-hand hearsay, or of first-hand observation of something with a multitude of possible interpretations. The idea that any government's military complex would want to suppress any evidence regarding bona fide UFOs, that is, craft of a non-earthly origin, is actually quite reasonable when one considers the possible threats to national security and public safety. If a government had reason to believe that objects were inserting themselves into national airspace and affecting maneuvers far beyond the capabilities of current technology, it would not want to risk the widespread civil unrest that would result in such information becoming widely known. The deep-set confidence one has in their country's latest nuclear submarine would suffer somewhat if faced with the threat from a flying craft that can seemingly disobey the laws of physics. If some decidedly more down-to-earth activity were involved, such as an experimental aircraft or clandestine spying project, one would expect a similar air of secrecy, albeit for a totally different reason. If the American or Australian military were spying on the Soviets, such information would be kept under wraps to prevent the Soviets from finding out and concocting some form of countermeasure. Many highball balloon flights had at least partially secretive purposes. To have Barbara Robin's film seized would be a reasonable and most likely legal course of action. That her entire camera was taken is not really relevant. There is no way of knowing if the camera was simply returned to her at a later time. The fact that many students were ordered not to speak with the media is also understandable considering Headmaster Sambleby's stern and straightforward method of performing his job. Undoubtedly, he would quickly tire of disruptions to the school's learning environment. Clearly, Sambleby did not believe in, nor have any patience with, anyone who believed in UFOs. He would have likely viewed the entire affair as a distraction and an affront to his duties as headmaster. There is also no reason to doubt Jacqueline Argent's claim of being questioned in Sambleby's office, but the claim should be considered from the viewpoint of the two officials, as well as the understandably anxious girl. Could they have been simply trying to learn if Ms. Argent saw a downed secret balloon? The fact that she suggested she saw something she couldn't readily identify was likely enough to put them at ease. And in any case, the very fact that the Westall UFO sighting became such public knowledge immediately following the event speaks to any supposed cover-up as either hopelessly inept or entirely non-existent. Australian newspapers, such as the Dandenong Journal, and school periodicals, such as the Clayton Calendar, were not in any way hindered in publishing. Andrew Greenwood, the only teacher witness vocal on the subject, was not prevented from being interviewed by either physicist James McDonald only a year after the event, or by investigator James J. Kibble at a later time. And as late as 2008, Greenwood did claim to investigator Shane Ryan that a pair of uniformed men, presumably Royal Australian Air Force officers, visited his home a week after the event and threatened to spread unfounded rumors of him being an alcoholic if he spoke about the UFO. The fact that he made no mention of this threat 40 years earlier when it was presumably fresh on his mind seems very strange. No threat was ever carried out and no salacious rumors ever materialized, despite giving prodigious amounts of information to MacDonald, a man who had neither motivation nor intention to keep quiet. Could this be an indication of a fault in Greenwood's memory, or could it simply be an embellishment added at a later time? It is tempting to conclude the entire event was purposefully expunged, but there is no reason to believe this out of hand, as the Australian government is no more immune to the imperfections of bureaucracy than any other. A host of unrelated documents from the era are probably also missing for one reason or another, but since Basterfield and his team were not looking for those, their absence was not noted. It is also possible all Westall-related material was simply sent abroad for further scrutiny, to either the Ministry of Defense in England or the Blue Book offices in the Pentagon. Then again, if the Westall UFO was in fact something already known to authorities, perhaps they didn't even classify it as a UFO in the first place. Noting the close proximity of the Moorabbin airport, many skeptics and investigators have theorized an unknown experimental aircraft was responsible for the sighting. As pointed out by writer Brian Dunning, this seems unlikely in light of the limited nature of Australia's aircraft industry of the day. Most manufacturing was centered around the small civilian variety and not something high performance or futuristic, akin to the American Skunk Works. Could the United States have been testing something in an Allies airspace? With millions of square kilometers of Australian outback, one struggles to understand the sense in flying a super-secret aircraft near one of the continent's most populated cities. Throughout the years, more efforts have been made to throw light on a supposed cover-up than on the origins and nature of the Westall UFO itself. An odd and somewhat off-putting fact that perhaps says more about human nature than one would care to admit. Mistrust and paranoia seem to trump curiosity and wonder. Taken by themselves, each account of the UFO Westall sighting seems a probable case of misidentification. Neither weather balloons nor target drogues are a common sight for the general population, certainly not for high schoolers, whom could be forgiven for not recognizing what they were looking at. But as a whole, such explanations seem to only generate more questions, most of which will likely go unanswered. Perhaps the students and teachers of Westall High School were a fortunate lot and caught a glimpse of a reality most of us miss during our busy lives. Or perhaps the tale is nothing more than a bubbling witch's brew of collective memory, a fleeting and uncertain thing in the best of times.
For millennia, people have spotted mysterious objects in the sky. Most witnesses are ordinary, sensible people, startled at what they see. Many now report their encounters to government officials who deny any knowledge of UFOs. Conspiracy? Cover-up? Or an ominous miscalculation of the power of the unexplained? (1980), 140 miles outside London on the east coast of England. Woodbridge and Brentwater's naval bases under the command of the United States Air Force. Together they formed the largest tactical fighter wing in the world. The two bases were separated by a 3-mile stretch of heavy woods known as Rendlesham Forest. The backdrop for one of the most investigated UFO sightings in history. This is what it looked like just after midnight on December 27th. Woodbridge security supervisor, Sergeant Jim Peniston, rushed to the East Gate, where sentries alerted him to strange lights.
My first thought on it was an aircraft downing, a possible aircraft crash. There was a color scheme of red and yellow and some white light. That's the reaction to get with chemicals.
Peniston radioed back to the flight supervisor and was given permission to investigate. He and the sentries advanced into the darkness until they stumbled on a sight they could not explain.
The air, for example, had a feeling of electricity in it. My feelings at the time ran from confusion to disbelief. I could not understand for the life of me what this could be. The craft itself measured approximately 9 feet by 9 feet, triangular in shape. It had no cockpit, as far as I could tell. There was no windows, just this very highly shiny, black, glass-like material. And I think the most fascinating part of it, at least as far as I was concerned as an investigator, was the fact that this had identifiable inscription, symbols on the side of it.
Peniston says he approached the craft. It was warm when he touched it. Suddenly, it began to move, lifting up silently right before his eyes and disappearing into the night sky. Peniston claims he drew this sketch of the craft at a debriefing the next morning with the Deputy Base Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt. The next night, Halt received word that the strange lights had returned.
Well, the base commander and I looked at each other quite in disbelief. And I said, well, we both agreed we needed to put this to bed.
Eager to debunk the entire affair, Halt collected a Geiger counter, night vision star scope, and a handheld tape recorder. Then, with a few men from the Disaster Preparedness Unit, he drove to the area where Peniston had seen the UFO. Soon, the portable lights they had brought mysteriously flickered and died. Halt, concerned for the safety of his men, ordered several of them back to the East Gate. With the rest of his unit, he walked into the forest checking radiation levels. He says they seemed unusually high. Suddenly, off in the distance, Halt spotted a glowing object. This is the actual recording Halt made of his UFO encounter that night.
Okay, we're looking at the thing, we're probably about 200 to 300 yards away. It looks like an eye winking at you, and it flashes so bright to the star scope that it almost burns your eye. There is no doubt about it. This is weird. There's something very, very strange.
And there we stood. Well, we didn't know quite what to think of that. But when we looked to the north, suddenly there were objects in the sky. And we watched this in awe. Suddenly the object came toward us at high speed. It moved directly toward us. I can't estimate the speed, but it moved very rapidly. Stopped and sent down a pencil-like beam at our feet. And just as fast as the beam appeared, it just clicked off, disappeared. I still have questions as to what happened. I really don't know what it was. I do know it was something strange, something that was controlled by some type of intelligence, and that's about all I really know.
2 weeks later, Halt described the incident in a one-page memo sent to the British Ministry of Defense. The British government never responded to the memo, but word of the encounter spread. 3 years later, UFO researchers pressured the Air Force commander to release the document under the Freedom of Information Act.
Well, he released it. And the very next day, I got to meet BBC One, BBC Two, ITV, German TV, Japanese TV, every local radio station. They were waiting on my doorstep at home and at the office. It was just unbelievable.
News of the Rendlesham incident also generated enormous interest from UFO researchers and skeptics. Here was a case with highly credible witnesses, trained Air Force personnel. Tucson astronomer and retired U.S. Air Force pilot James McGahey is a UFO skeptic who investigated Halt and Peniston's alleged encounter. McGahey insists Halt mistook the beams from a lighthouse 5 miles away for a spacecraft.
That object that was winking at him, which is on the tape, is clearly the lighthouse. Now, he's looking at the lighthouse, I think, with a starlight scope. Now, remember, here comes this beam of light. He's looking at this light with 100,000 times intensity. What it's going to do is it's going to burn out the image in the center, so it's going to become black. And that's what easily explains the beams and these other things.
When Halt's tape is played against the flashing from the lighthouse, this seems to be the case.
Right in this position here, straight ahead, in between the tree. There it is again. Watch, straight ahead off my flash back there. There it is. Hey, I see it too.
I can't explain that. I really don't know. I never gave it any thought. I do know that the whole time we were out there, we could see the lighthouse. And the lighthouse was about 35 or 40 degrees off to our right from where this whole thing took place.
Did area radar operators confirm the UFO sighting? Halt says maybe.
They really didn't confirm they found anything. Although later I found out that when they reviewed the tapes, they did find some things on the tape.
If he has a radar report, I'd like to see it, because I investigated this and I couldn't find one.
Skeptics also suggest the Rendlesham UFO might have been a meteor, bright stars, or a Russian satellite that fell out of the sky that night.
To me, this is just a case of where a number of people saw some lights, got a little excited, thought about UFOs, and all of a sudden everything they see is a UFO. The first night, it was a combination of a satellite reentry, a meteor fireball, and a police car driving around in the woods. The second night, it turns out to be a lighthouse, some microwave antennas, and some stars in the sky.
We had a controlled landing. Apparently, there was no crater. We also had a craft that was able to take back off with absolutely no sound, which tells me high technology, and maneuver back through the tree line, rise over the trees, hover momentarily, and then take off at incredible speed. It's just totally ridiculous to even consider that it was a Russian satellite or a meteor. Impossible.
In 1991, believing serious questions were still unanswered, the British government finally responded to the Rendlesham incident. Nick Pope, its top UFO investigator, reopened the case.
I've always felt that Rendlesham Forest is a case which displays a lot of important factors all drawn together. You have a multiple witness event. Those witnesses are trained military observers. The Defence Radiological Protection Service had no explanation as to why the radiation readings taken by Colonel Halt's team were so high. Undoubtedly, something very strange had happened there.
Pope requested further investigation. The British government said no and closed the file. Perhaps in part due to this fact, Sergeant Peniston arrived at the site at approximately 1 a.m. and re-emerged from Rendlesham Forest after dawn, but can only account for less than an hour of his time. Skeptics question how Peniston could make such an historic discovery and yet not report back to the base for several hours.
What we had thought was apparently only maybe an hour's worth of investigation time turned out to be 4 hours. I got a feeling that might have been the adrenaline. We were pumped up at that point in time.
What is it that Peniston says he saw and touched that night? To this day, he is perplexed by the entire incident.
Something that can sustain a controlled flight, something that has mass, something that makes no sound, and something that can take off at incredible speeds back up into the atmosphere. Explain it. I can't.
Unknown forms in the sky surprise and alarm citizens below, sometimes causing governments to do battle with the unexplained. Belgium, the center of Europe, and the focus of one of the most famous UFO encounters in history. On the evening of November 15, 1989, police officer Francis Michelzik had completed a few hours of routine patrol in Anza Belgian village near the German border, when Michelzik says he looked up and became one of the first witnesses of the Belgian wave.
Nous avons observé une masse importante qui était dans le ciel.
We saw a large mass in the sky, a triangular mass with three lights oriented downward, about 200 meters from our police van.
Cet objet ne faisait pas de bruit et était immobile.
The object was silent and immobile. This object did not correspond in any way to anything we'd seen before.
À ce que nous avions déjà pu voir dans le passé.
2 weeks later, Dieter Plumens, a member of the Gendarmerie, the Belgian National Police Force, heard over his police radio fellow officers nearby reporting a strange object in the night sky.
At first, when we heard our colleagues talking to dispatching, we thought they were crazy.
Plumens requested permission to investigate, and when he reached the edge of town, he says he witnessed an astounding sight.
We stopped right in front of the nursing home, and there was an immense object over our heads. The object had three lights at its extremities and a blinking red light in the center. At a certain point, I saw a small object leave the large thing, an object which was also flashing, which came straight down and then turned and flew around the back of the nursing home. After that, the large object transformed itself into a single light, and we followed it toward Germany.
Belgian radio and TV soon were filled with reports of similar sightings, prompting hundreds of calls to the office of the top UFO research group in Belgium, known by its acronym SOBEPS. Over the next several months, researchers documented more than 800 so-called close encounters. SOBEPS eventually published 2 thick volumes on the Belgian wave.
Specific characteristics of the phenomenon were reported by many people. We have hundreds of reports of people who mentioned something below a distance of 100 meters.
Then, on March 30th, 1990, the Belgian wave story took a dramatic twist. Near midnight, several police officers called a NATO radar installation with reports of a UFO. Within an hour, that facility and a second radar station were both tracking an unknown flying object. The Chief of Operations for the Belgian Air Force, Lieutenant Colonel Wilfred de Brouwer, ordered Ground Command to scramble a pair of F-16 fighter jets armed with missiles. A supersonic high-tech cat-and-mouse game ensued. The jets' radar locked on to their targets 9 times. But with each lock-on, the object drastically changed its position. After an hour, the F-16s lost contact and returned to base. For weeks, the encounter was kept under wraps, but Colonel de Brouwer felt compelled to share what he knew. During an interview with a reporter from one of Europe's most popular magazines, Paris Match, de Brouwer described what happened. The story stopped the presses. Within days, de Brouwer called a news conference and told reporters from around the world what he knew and what he didn't know. This is what the pilots saw on their radar. The UFO appears as a diamond in the center of the screen.
What these pilots detected was well outside the normal flying envelope of an airplane. In other words, sometimes they had what we call lock-ons on a target, which gave a parameters varying from speeds between 150 knots till 990 knots. an acceleration which occurred in a few seconds. These speeds would be impossible to tolerate for a human being.
Colonel de Brouwer never suggested the mysterious flying craft was from outer space. He only said its speed and rate of acceleration were unexplained. Over the next few months, the sightings became more sporadic, and the Belgian wave came to an end. Did the skies over Belgium become a way station for alien spacecraft? If not, what did thousands of people witness? Physical evidence is the key to proving the existence of UFOs. The Belgian wave, despite hundreds of credible eyewitnesses, has produced only one piece of convincing evidence. This photo, taken by a civilian bystander in the town of Petit Réchon. The photo was examined by former NASA scientist Richard Haynes, a specialist in vision, optics, and human perception.
My analysis of the Petit Réchon photograph suggests very strongly to me that the object that was photographed does not obey laws of physics as we know them. Second point I would make is it's not a forgery. And finally, I think that there may be some clues in this photograph having to do with propulsion and lift.
Belgian scientists and skeptics tried to calm what they considered the UFO hysteria of the Belgian wave. A professor at the Astrophysics Institute at Belgium's prestigious University of Liège, Pierre Mega, decided to put the Petit Réchon photo to his test.
We tried to reproduce this photograph, and we produced this picture, which is well, very close to the original picture. So I think the only way to go ahead and to try to understand more is to do as we did, to analyze the witness report together with the photograph and to see if everything is consistent. And there are so many inconsistencies that it's very hard to believe it's a true picture.
I don't see how someone could recreate this down at almost the grain level of the film. It would take a Steven Spielberg kind of a capability to do this in a technical laboratory.
The most convincing evidence for the skeptics' position involved the radar lock-ons by the F-16s. Belgium's Electronic War Center analyzed the radar tapes and found that the object descended below ground level at some points, a physical impossibility. The center concluded that all but one of the radar lock-ons were really caused by electromagnetic interference or unusual atmospheric conditions. Eventually, even SOBEPS agreed. But one major question remains unanswered and unexplained. Experts say that when ground-based and air-based radar track the same object simultaneously, the object is real. One of the lock-ons, a simultaneous tracking of the UFO by one of the F-16s and the ground radar station, has never been explained.
If I remember, it's lock-on number 9. Which has some very weird characteristics. And these characteristics doesn't fit with atmospherical explanation, not at all.
Thousands of people still wonder if what they saw came from another world. Others ask if that single perplexing radar report is a clue to civilizations in distant galaxies. Questions for those who find answers in the unexplained. For years, the U.S. government seriously investigated sightings of UFOs. Thousands of cases passed through the hands of military and other government agencies. Most of these cases had rational explanations. The rest remained classified as unexplained. "50-year-old Polish immigrant and amateur geologist Stephen Mahalik looked forward to his weekend getaways alone in the Falcon Lake area, 90 miles east of his home in Winnipeg, Manitoba. This was Mahalik's favorite prospecting site. Around noon on May 20th, 1967, as he examined a quartz formation, Mahalik was distracted by some unruly geese. He looked up and was transfixed. He says he saw two cigar-shaped objects glowing red in the sky. The following is a recording Mahalik later made of what he saw next.
The size, was amazing. And here they're coming down. With speed, I just can't describe. Amazing speed.
Mahalik says one of them stopped, suddenly accelerated, then disappeared. The other landed about 50 yards away. He watched in awe.
I hear shh, and I hear a high-pitched whistle of running equipment, pumps on high speed. When the thing landed, it was of gray pink color. It's stainless steel, and it was pink hot. And I can feel the breeze on my face that thing is hot outside. There was my notebook, there was my pencil, so I sketched this thing.
Mahalik claims it was round, about 40 feet long and about 10 feet high. His curiosity took hold, and he approached the craft. He examined the outside of it, slowly touching the glowing skin with his gloved hand. It was fiery hot, nearly melting the palm of his rubber glove. Mahalik says the craft rotated, turning its grid-like exhaust vent toward him. The blast of hot gas from the vent knocked him to the ground, setting his shirt and undershirt on fire. The craft suddenly lifted off the ground, according to Mahalik, and soared straight up. He threw his burning shirts to the ground, dazed and in severe pain from burns to his chest and stomach. Mahalik says he wandered around for what seemed like hours before he managed to gather up his supplies. He found his way out of the woods, caught a bus, and later that night arrived back in Winnipeg. Still in pain, he rushed from the bus station to nearby Misericordia Hospital, where he was treated for first-degree burns. Mahalik claimed the blast from the craft had etched a grid-like pattern into his abdomen that matched the pattern on the exhaust vent. The next day, Sunday, he was spirited off to the St. Regis Hotel after convincing the managing editor of Winnipeg's highly regarded daily newspaper, the Winnipeg Tribune, that his extraordinary encounter was real.
At that time, I said, okay, as any newsman would have done, draw it. I gave him a piece of paper. I think that drawing has become the most famous UFO piece of evidence in the world today. He sat down, he drew it in front of me. I hid it. I talked to him. I called doctors, I called police, and I sure as hell didn't want the Winnipeg Free Press getting the story.
Monday's edition of the Tribune led with this headline: Mahalik soon became a sensation worldwide. What followed was one of the most intensely examined UFO cases on record. Over the next 2 years, Mahalik's burns kept recurring, and no one could explain why. He was examined by more than a dozen physicians in Canada and the United States, including doctors at the Mayo Clinic. An investigation by the Royal Canadian Air Force concluded that the abdominal burns sustained by Mr. Mahalik remain as unexplainable as to the source of the burn. The Mayo Clinic psychological report concluded that Mahalik was not prone to delusions, hallucinations, or any type of emotional disorder. Perhaps the most influential investigation was conducted under the auspices of the United States government. The chief investigator, physicist Roy Craig, is now retired and raises llamas on his Colorado ranch. His job was to examine UFO reports and find physical evidence.
We responded to the Falcon Lake report as soon as we could. Now, there's no value in seeing a landing site that somebody's had a chance to go back and prepare for me to look at. But if we could get back and find a landing site that had not been seen by anyone else or been altered by human beings, there may be something there that we could use as real evidence that he had a real experience. I mean, comparable with the appearance of human beings on Earth.
2 weeks after the encounter, Craig flew to Winnipeg and joined Mahalik on his first return to the landing site.
He guided us on what he said was a big search for the site. Actually, we just roamed around in haphazard circles, coming back to about where we started, and didn't go very far at all. He was trying to give us the impression of leading us on a search for a site. And we all concluded that the site probably did not exist.
With no apparent physical evidence, Craig classified the case as without merit. The American investigation was over. University of Manitoba astronomer Chris Rutkowski, believing the government reports left many questions unanswered, launched his own investigation. In 1994, he published The Falcon Lake Case, Too Close an Encounter, in the respected Journal of UFO Studies.
The terrain around the site is very rugged, very rocky. The brush is very, very dense. The trees all look alike. The rocks all look alike. And to a person who's disoriented, not feeling very well, it might be very, very difficult to find the exact site after some period of time has elapsed.
Skeptics, disagreeing with Rutkowski, also do not believe that Mahalik would make physical contact with an extremely hot object he assumed was a UFO. But this does not surprise his son.
He is the kind of fellow that fear is not in his vocabulary. Not that he's a fearless man, but that when he sees something he doesn't understand, he doesn't fear it. He just chooses to understand it.
Skeptics wonder why no one else saw the craft.
I talked with the people who were in charge of managing the fire tower. It was manned at that time, and the people were absolutely certain that there was no way that two vehicles like he described, glowing as they were, could fly into that space and out again. There was no way that that could happen without their seeing it. My conclusion on that case is that all the evidence that I found pointed toward hoax rather than a real experience. And not even a skillful hoax, a very inept hoax.
Mahalik became bedridden and incapacitated in the 1980s. Was this hard-working and devoted family man capable of crafting such a hoax?
For my dad to fabricate something as large as this would require more than I think he had, more than he has. He's a simple man. He grew up and lived a very straight, hard life.
This was no con man. This was a man who later went down a Mayo. They couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure it out. The doctor I had there couldn't figure it out. I am not about to be taken by anybody. This guy didn't take me. This guy was legit.
Stephen Mahalik never wavered from his story. He believed he had encountered a UFO. Roy Craig and the U.S. government disagreed, but they never classified the case as solved. The official report lists Mahalik's sighting as unexplained. In the past, the U.S. government routinely took a keen interest in reports of UFOs. Now, it denies any investigative role, leaving only questions for witnesses of close encounters with the unexplained. On the night of March 8, 1994, something strange was sighted in the skies over Holland, Michigan, on the southeastern shore of Lake Michigan. Witnesses were startled and called police.
There were at least 4 lights, and they were all flashing like okay, they were the sequence. It was a kind of like a V.
There was like probably 4 or 5 lights, and they were all flashing right in a row from the top all the way down to the bottom.
The lights hovered over the outskirts of town near the home of Holly and Daryl Graves. Their 15-year-old son, Joey, was sitting in the living room watching TV.
Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a light, and I looked out the window, and there was a round circle of light. I called my parents, and they were sleeping. They didn't know what was going on, and my mom, she called 911 to get a cop or someone out here to look at it.
911.
We were just wondering, have you heard anything about these lights that are flickering up here? It's different. I've never seen anything like it.
Okay, we'll have somebody check it out.
It looked like a sphere. The lights were really weird because they changed, but they kind of faded into a different color, so it wasn't like regular lights. So it was kind of weird.
We watched it up to about a half hour.
just slowly moving south. We were just in awe, I think, about the whole thing. There was no noise. It was very peaceful out. We just stood there and watched this object. At that moment, Officer Veldhuis pulled in the driveway.
What I saw were two bright lights. Their movement was something that really caught my attention. Their speed accelerated, and then it slowed down again. And I decided to have our 911 dispatcher contact a radar operator in Muskegon, Michigan.
It was a clear night. It was about 10 p.m. I was alone on duty, and we had a call from the central dispatcher in Ottawa County, which is quite common for the police department to call us whenever they have any type of weather questions.
Weather Service, Muskegon. Hi, Muskegon. This is Ottawa County 911 calling. You getting anything weird down in the southern Ottawa County area?
Bouchon checked his radar for any images, what radar operators call returns.
I'm seeing 3 of those. They're very strong. These are huge returns. I've never seen anything like this. Not even when I'm doing storms.
This is really weird.
These are bigger than planes. They're about over center of Lake Michigan, 3 of them in a triangle.
What was extraordinary about this case was that radar apparently detected the object at the same time witnesses saw it. It is a level of confirmation rarely achieved in reported UFO sightings.
Airplanes look like they're moving. These were just sitting still. And then a few minutes later, they would disappear from one spot and show up somewhere else. I really didn't know what it was.
Strange lights in the night sky, moving at otherworldly speed. The image confirmed on a radar screen. Was this finally convincing evidence of a technology far beyond our own? Had alien spacecraft paid a visit to Holland, Michigan? There was no explanation for these sightings. A reporter for the Muskegon Chronicle, Michael Walsh, decided to investigate for himself. He too found the story remarkable.
We've had past articles where people have reported some strange phenomena, especially at this time of year. But not once did we ever have any dual confirmations, visual plus the radar.
Others began looking into the incident, fascinated by the radar confirmation. A professor of natural sciences and, at the same time, the editor of the Journal of UFO Studies, UFO researcher Michael Swords met with radar operator Jack Bouchon.
We went into the radar room. This young fellow really knew how to use the equipment. He would show us the difference between a hard count of something like an airliner and a soft response of something like a storm cloud. And it was obvious this was an extremely competent operator.
Skeptics point out that Bouchon was still a Weather Service intern at the time of the sighting. California engineer and skeptic Robert Schaefer thinks he can explain what the images really were.
The National Weather Service says that they tracked the number of objects over Lake Michigan, but of course not everything that turns up on radar is a solid object. Radar is subjected to mirage conditions of various kinds.
Schaefer believes that the sightings over the lake can be explained by a natural phenomenon, which usually happens over Lake Michigan in the spring. Warm air moves over the cold waters of the lake. The layer of cold air trapped beneath the layer of warm air creates a mirror effect in the sky by bending the light. This effect is called a temperature inversion. One of the best-known investigators of UFO sightings, Philip J. Klass, is a technical journalist for Aviation Week in Space Technology and an expert on radar systems.
Ground radar, especially during temperature inversion conditions, the rays can be, instead of going straight out, they can be bent downwards, so where you get echoes from the ground.
We're trained to know the difference between temperature inversions and, for instance, precipitation, because they appear to be the same thing.
Klass says that since Bouchon was using old linear radar, not the newer Doppler radar, the images were probably atmospheric tricks.
It is a weather radar. It is not designed, especially, to detect metal objects or aircraft.
These returns were not only hard returns, but they showed up in this geometric pattern. And that when, say, the lead return would move out into Lake Michigan, the other two would stay behind. Then they would move to reform the triangle.
In fact, according to Muskegon Chronicle reporter Michael Walsh, most of the UFO witnesses did report strikingly similar patterns, shapes, and sizes.
I believe that each of them sincerely believed what they saw was something extraordinary. That's not to say that it's extraterrestrial or paranormal. It may very well be a very physical manifestation of something that we don't yet know about.
There is no consensus on what the UFOs over Holland, Michigan might have been. Skeptics point to a temperature inversion and its effect on both the lights in the sky and the radar on the ground. Witnesses, including a Weather Service radar operator, say they know they saw something real. But what was it?
I have no idea.
Personally, I'm not sure what I saw either.
Well, it was a UFO.
I was like in awe.
Do these eyewitness accounts and the radar confirmation merit further investigation? The government answered that question long ago. It says no, leaving this encounter one that may forever remain unexplained. Since the 1940s, believers in the unexplained have charged the U.S. government with conspiracy and cover-up. In the 1990s, those charges concentrated on a super-secret military base. In the heart of the desert, on the outskirts of Las Vegas, sits Nellis Air Force Base. 85 miles to the northwest is Restricted Area 4808E, popularly known as Area 51, a jumble of mysterious hangars and runways in one of the most desolate places on Earth. Officially, it does not exist. Here, the U.S. tests its most exotic and advanced flying machines. The B-2 stealth bomber, the Blackbird, and the U-2. The Area 51 control tower identifies itself to area pilots only as Dreamland. There are no tours of Area 51. Instead, soldiers carry loaded machine guns with the authorization to use them. This base, shrouded in secrecy, has become for many the focus of the world's fascination with UFOs and its hope for contact with extraterrestrial life. UFO fans from all over the world drive the extraterrestrial highway, a lonely stretch of road that hugs the perimeter of the base to Mailbox Road. From this location, hundreds of UFO sightings have been reported. The vast majority have been explained as lights from the latest earthbound military technology. Some, however, are harder to identify. Author Chuck Clark describes a remarkable craft he says he has seen many times.
It can go from a hover to several thousand miles an hour and back to a hover instantly. It can make very sharp right-angle turns and sharper than right-angle turns. I've seen 120-degree turns at high speed. It appears and disappears in mid-air, things that normal aircraft don't do.
UFO buffs contend the U.S. is testing an extraterrestrial craft at Area 51. But skeptics and UFO researchers agree that Area 51 is a UFO bust.
Almost all the sightings I hear about happen at night. And at night, you can't judge distance. You can't judge easily height in the sky. You can't judge speed. You can't judge actual performance. What I think is that there are no UFOs there. There are no UFOs being developed there. There's no UFO technology there.
Today, the government does not investigate UFO sightings, but for years, they were of vital interest. Beginning in 1948, the U.S. Air Force began what became known as Project Blue Book, the government's official UFO investigating arm. But both skeptics and UFO believers say Project Blue Book was half-hearted at best.
As time went on, and especially after the year of 1952, Blue Book's mission was changed. It was changed from being a somewhat serious look at unidentified flying objects to be basically a public relations office to try to diffuse emotionalism that was occurring in the American public about this. So, because this was a rather unsatisfying task to the people at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, they tried rather continuously from the mid-50s onward to get rid of this task.
In 1966, the U.S. Air Force commissioned the University of Colorado to conduct a thorough evaluation of the UFO phenomenon. The Condon Commission, named after its chairman, Dr. Edward Condon, began an 18-month investigation that ended in controversy.
Condon was an eminent physicist who ridiculed UFOs. He didn't take it seriously. He didn't spend time on the project. So the project went wrong because essentially from the top, not the scientific staff, but from the top, it was designed to help the Air Force get rid of the UFO problem. Well, how could it be designed to do that unless it said UFOs weren't important, weren't serious, and weren't a scientific problem?
Retired physicist and former investigator for the Condon Commission, Roy Craig, strongly supports the Commission's work.
We'd have some excellent reports come in with all sorts of proof that there was a strange vehicle there. And each bit of evidence that we checked out turned out to not be what it really sounded like to start with. And the evidence just plain got less and less. The more we learned about the case, the less mysterious it became.
The Commission considered whether UFOs were a threat to America's airspace, demanding military investigation.
There was no threats to our security, therefore they really didn't have to interject themselves in the investigation. They could leave this over to civilian agencies.
We don't have any national security defense against this anyway. And if these characters wanted to do something really overtly and catastrophically nefarious to us, this would probably gone on a long time ago.
The Condon Commission concluded that the government should stop investigating UFOs. As a result, in 1969, after 21 years and 15,000 UFO reports, including thousands classified as unexplained, the Air Force closed down Project Blue Book. But interest in UFOs remains high, despite the official position taken by the government. Was the government justified in terminating its UFO investigations? Most scientists and researchers, including astronomer Larry Chupik of Chicago's Adler Planetarium, say yes.
We don't find that the stories of aliens in some government hangar are true. We don't find pieces of spacecraft. I think when people look at the sky and they don't know what they're seeing, they tend to think of unusual things. And they've heard reports. So reports can stimulate them to make their mind see something they're not really seeing.
I don't reject the idea that there are flying saucers on Earth from elsewhere on the basis that has always been given that our universe is so vast that they couldn't get here, and therefore they aren't here. We could not, because of our ignorance of our universe, say that other beings could not be here. I think it's arrogance to make that kind of statement on the basis of our current scientific knowledge. But that doesn't mean that I think they are here.
I don't believe we've been visited by extraterrestrials. I haven't seen the evidence for it yet. So we say the question is very much open and should be studied carefully.
For 30 years, I've been looking. I have yet to find a single piece of scientifically credible evidence to indicate that we have alien visitors. All we have are unexplained cases.
Have we been visited by extraterrestrials? Could the elusive evidence be found in a small number of mysterious reports that defy explanation?
Almost all of them turn out to be things we as scientists can identify, even though most people couldn't. Now, those last few are always questionable because neither we nor the observers know what they are. These are the unexplained.
People will always stare at the sky and wonder about its mysterious images. They then will turn to their leaders for answers. the leaders turned to science. In the end, people have a choice: accept the answers of science or embrace what lies in the vast reaches of the unexplained.